How does a battered Matthew Stafford make Marvin Jones and TJ Hawkinson fantasy viable? Should you be adjusting your lineup setting strategy in Week 15? And will an unheralded AFC West wide receiver crash high-stakes fantasy football lineups this weekend in a good way? Plus, the Week 14 leader in the Footballguys Players Championship, Mike Jenckes, will drop by to talk about holding his lead, his tough start-sit decisions this week, and much more. We've got a great show for you. Farrell Elliott is here. I'm Eric Balkman. Stick around. Your high-stakes fantasy football hour starts now.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now listening to the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. Welcome to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, presented by MyFFPC.com, with your hosts Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for analysis from the best players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here's Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott.
It is the final night of Hanukkah, and I'm wishing a happy Hanukkah to all of the listeners who are celebrating that this evening. Welcome to the latest episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, brought to you by MyFFPC.com. Thanks to our producer and mutual friend, Rob. Thank you to the Quiet Hollers, and remember to check out the Quiet Hollers music at quiethollers.com. I am, of course, your slightly above average host, Eric Balkman. My co-host is indeed the definitive commissioner of fantasy football. It is Farrell Elliott. Farrell, we are a week away from Christmas, and we are just hours away from continuing Week 15 of the 2020 fantasy football season. How are your teams looking, and how are you doing tonight, sir?
Okay, I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking. I just wish my teams in the FFPC and the Football Guys were doing near as well as yours are in the KFFSC. But I'm hanging in there. I'm enjoying it. I've got triple-digit standings behind all my teams, so I've got a lot of work to do. What a great tournament. It was an exciting week last weekend. What a game to kick it off Thursday night, huh?
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about that because I was actually watching this with our good friend Two-Packer, with our good friend the real Leroy. We're watching this Chargers-Raiders game at a local establishment here in northeast Wisconsin, and my heart just went out for you. Because Michael Badgley left the door wide open for your Raiders to win this game, and they almost took care of it with a touchdown early on in overtime. It just wasn't meant to be last night.
The more Darren Waller you can get, the better off it is. And, we lost Mr. Carr very early, and then so Waller was able to pick up with a wonderful night. Jacobs had a night for fantasy ballers. Everyone, we said start everyone on the Chargers, and we were correct with the exception of the kicker and Keenan Allen. That's one of those tough starts, when it gets you. It was too tempting not to put Keenan Allen in against that secondary, and, oh, man, were they woeful.
Yeah, let's talk about Keenan Allen real briefly before we kick off the show. So I came into Week 15 in 15th place overall in Kentucky, and I did have Keenan Allen in my roster. And actually, the two teams I have in the championship round in Kentucky, I had Keenan Allen on both those teams. And I looked at it, and I did not feel good about any of my replacements on either of those teams, and so I started Keenan Allen. Outside of Kentucky, I started Keenan Allen everywhere because I didn't feel good about any of my other options. And quite frankly, Farrell, and I know this, it's one of those things, hindsight is 20/20, but looking at it in a vacuum where the Raiders and Chargers game are the only one to take place so far, I still feel good about my decision. I used all the information I had at my disposal. I used, you had Peter Overs that was actually talking about this in the Matthew Berry email today that said, right before lineups lock, Keenan Allen, they were showing him on the ESPN or the broadcast on Thursday Night Football, and Keenan Allen looked right in the camera and said, "Don't sit me." and I didn't see it. But if I would have seen that, I still would have played him. So it's one of those things where you're disappointed about the outcome, but I've made my peace with the process, and I'd probably do it the same way over again. It just didn't work out. That's how fantasy football is sometimes, right?
It is that way sometimes. And, Keenan Allen, sometimes you got to take the tough guy test. And remember, this guy tried to play with a lacerated kidney once. So he's in a situation where he's always trying to play, and he always believes he can run through the brick wall. Those kind of guys can get you in trouble. So make a note of it. Keenan Allen, that's something the training staff couldn't help him with, could not get him back on the field, and could not make him look like himself. The thing about it is that the young players haven't played so very, very well, they might have ran Mr. Allen out there for a few more plays. But good depth in that wide receiver core with the Chargers, and if you have good fantasy depth at wide receiver, you would have been you would probably have done the right thing, just like you, Bulky. You moved on to a better selection that will be playing either Saturday, Sunday, or Monday.
Yeah, and I'm moving on. I'm excited to watch those games. We have 3 nights of football now coming up starting tomorrow. We get the Bills and Broncos, the Packers and Panthers on Saturday, a full slate on Sunday, and then, of course, the Monday night game this week. Very excited for that. We're going to talk about all that and more. In fact, we're going to get you set on how to handle Atlanta Falcons skill position players with Julio Jones out of action in Week 15. We're going to talk about whether a certain young NFC North tight end is being benched in too many FFPC leagues right now. And then, of course, Mike Jenckes is going to hang out with us to break down how he got all the way to the top of the 2020 Football Guys Players Championship and a ton more. Shout out to the chat room right now. You guys can post any questions you might have in there. If you want to connect with us on Twitter, please do so. The show is at HSFF Hour. I am at Eric Balkman. You could always check out more on the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship. Find out how to compete against me and many other FFPC players at kffsc.com in 2021. Mike Jenckes is on Twitter at Jenckes Mike. That is JENCKES Mike. Post on our Facebook page at facebook.com/HSFF Hour as well. And please give us a call tonight, 347-426 3682. That's 347-GAME-OVA. And if you want to send the OG way to contact us, email highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com is where to get a hold of us there. If you have any questions for us for tonight's show, you got to send them in now. We're going to try to get to all the chat room questions, all the tweets, all the emails, and the fantasy feedback segment coming up in the final segment of the show, thanks to our audio engineer and my best friend, Bryce, and, of course, our producer and mutual friend, Rob. Programming note. Coming up at the end of the show, we're going to tell you more about our show next week. If you notice, a week from today is Christmas Day. Will we be doing a show that day? Probably not. So when will we be doing a show? Listen for the end of the broadcast. We'll tell you when you can listen to us next week. All right, so the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown was popping off again this past week. We had a great guest, Adam Grossman, who has placed very high in the Football Guys Players Championship before. He's got numerous satellite, FPC, and Dynasty titles to his name. We actually get into a little Dynasty fantasy football conversation in that. You can check that out at rotoviz.com/podcast or anywhere you get podcasts. Farrell, this is my curse because here we are. I still got teams in contention to win titles this year. I'm already looking to rookie drafts in 2021. I'm already trying to figure out how I'm going to plot my dynasty strategy in 2021. We got 2 weeks of football left, man. It never ends, really. And you can get into dynasty leagues in Kentucky and compete against me. You can get in dynasty leagues in the FFPC. It's so much fun. Fantasy football over the last half decade has truly become a year-round thing.
Oh, it truly is, Bulky, and I watch all these college games. There's some great college championships from what they've been able to piece together in the system of what college football has been this year. Tonight, it's the MAC. It's the MAC College Championship, which always scores 1 million points. Ball State and Buffalo. The Buffalo Bulls have the running back. His last name is Patterson, and he will be a Frank Gore type running back in the NFL with possibly similar success to James Robinson. Watch him. Ball State on the other side has a corner named Phillips that look better than anyone that the Raiders put on the field.
Yeah, and Jarrett Patterson was the dude. What was it? Probably like less than a month ago. he had he had the second highest single game rushing total in FBS history with 409 yards. He had 8 touchdowns against Kent State. He is a special player. And by the way, his twin brother for Buffalo that same game, 13 solo tackles. So those Pattersons, they know how to breed football players.
Yeah, they can bring it.
And they absolutely did too, for sure. So yeah, the MAC is always a lot of fun. We got Pac-12 action, we got Big Ten action, we got a ton of conference championship action. We'll be paying attention to that as well. If you do not want to quite look ahead to Dynasty yet, remember the world famous FFPC Challenge is back. The Footballguys Playoff Challenge is back for year 2. Now, the FFPC Playoff Challenge, over $1 million in prizes, $500,000 to first place, $200 entry fee. Those registrations are already going on at myffpc.com. If you want to look for something a little bit smaller, maybe you want to get more teams in, do the Footballguys Playoff Challenge. That's only $35 to enter, and you can still win $100,000. Absolutely insane turnout on that. Last year, we expect the same this year. So far, we've been getting it this year. Both those contests, myffpc.com. Thanks to Footballguys, Draft Sharks, Roto World, and Rob for tonight's Fantasy Flash. Big news out of New Orleans, Pharaoh. Adam Schefter has reported Drew Brees is going to be the starting quarterback for the Saints against Kansas City this week. Now, originally, earlier this week, Sean Payton told the press that Drew Brees has, quote, a ways to go before he can get back out on the field as the full-time starter for New Orleans. But he named him as the starting quarterback for the Chiefs this week. The Saints lost to the Eagles last week in disappointing fashion thanks to a pretty good effort from Jalen Hurts under center for the Eagles. But Taysom Hill will go to the bench temporarily. I'm sure he'll get in for a few plays like he normally does. But Brees will indeed be under center. He will be throwing to Alvin Kamara. He will be throwing to Jared Cook. He will not be throwing to Michael Thomas, who we found out is going to miss this game. So knowing what we know about Brees, knowing that he won't have Michael Thomas, Farrell, how comfortable would you be about Drew Brees as a top 10, maybe a top 12 fantasy option for those players trying to get him back in their starting lineups this week?
There is so much going on with this game. It's difficult to say. I would have to sit with that. You know, I went into the playoffs with 3 quarterbacks if I could get them rostered, and it would be easy for me to look elsewhere. There's some good matchup against guys that I wouldn't ordinarily play. All the fantasy players know who those guys are. If I'm stuck with the idea of having to play Brees, I try to comfort myself in the fact that it's going to be a chaser game. But I'm not so sure. You said Taysom Hill a few plays. You know, Taysom Hill, 6 games this year with Brees, more than 20% of the snaps. Chiefs struggle. Balky, if you look it up, Chiefs struggle against running quarterbacks. And so I think we might have more Hill than we expect. And if those ribs are hit again with Drew Brees, and if he takes some abuse in this game, it's an easier idea for this football team to put Taysom Hill right back in. So I'm not very comfortable. We've talked about it before, and I haven't spent a lot of attention with other players that have been injury prone, but I'm not very comfortable with Brees' health, putting him out and maybe expecting him to finish this game. I know he's going to start it. I know he's a great competitor. It's somewhat confusing. Of course, everybody with Kamara, they love the fact that Brees returns to the lineup because they see double points with Brees than they do Hill. So, there's just so many players affected by who's on the field here. Some's a net, a very substantive net gain. Others, it can be a wash. Hill has impressed me more so than I thought he would in the way that he's played the game. I think there's very good opportunities for him to flash against the Chiefs. I think we'll see him on the field. So.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And when it comes back down to Brees, too, I mean, you know, it's exciting to put him back in there. But, again, no Michael Thomas. I mean, who's he throwing to? Emmanuel Sanders, Jared Cook? I mean, you know, there's kind of limited upside. Even in a potential shootout game, I think the total on that game was like 52 last time I looked at it. But, you know, you look at Phillip Rivers against the Texans. You look at Ben Roethlisberger against the Bengals. Jalen Hurts against the Cardinals. I mean, Jared Goff against the Jets. These are all players that I think might have more of a ceiling than Drew Brees does against the Kansas City Chiefs, even in an advantageous matchup, especially when you bring up the whole Taysom Hill factor, Farrell. Good on you. I think that's something that fantasy owners have to consider as well. Speaking of other quarterback situations, Matthew Stafford did not practice today. Darrell Bevell, God bless Darrell Bevell, former Wisconsin Badgers great quarterback, he said that Stafford doesn't need to practice at all this week in order to play on Sunday. Stafford is going to make the trip to Nashville to play against the Titans, and it sounds like, based on everything I've read and heard, that Stafford will be the starting quarterback against the Titans. Farrell, I'm curious, because you know the potential of Stafford going out, you know that Chase Daniel would be the guy to step in. Does that change at all your plans on what you would be doing normally with Marvin Jones, with T.J. Hawkinson in this matchup, or do they remain unchanged regardless of if Stafford goes out with an injury, if he's inactive, and Chase Daniel's the guy that is going to be running that offense on Sunday?
A difficult matchup for Stafford if he's healthy. He's such a competitor. You know, I love him as a player, and if he plays, I'll go ahead and start my Marvin Jones because I've benefited from it this year. You know what's really fascinating, and I'll go through this very, very quickly and begin to talk about Chase Daniel. I have a lot of people say, how is Chase Daniel in the league? Balky's about your height. He's 6'0", so really he's 5'11", you know, and he's and you know, when you start the show, this is the answer to that question, because I have clients ask me all the time that are out of work at the quarterback position, why is Chase Daniel in the league and this team's not working me out? We start our show by saying, very tongue-in-cheek and certainly not appropriate to my co-host Eric Balton, quality podcaster that he is, but we say that no one else was available. And if you go back to when Chase Daniel entered this league in 2009, I want to give you quickly the quarterbacks that were drafted, okay? Mark Sanchez, Josh Freeman, Nate Davis, Tom Brandenstater. He was out of Fresno. Didn't last very long. Pat White. Stephen McGee. Stephen McGee was a backup at Dallas. All these guys went through the CFL. Curtis Painter was a late pick and hung around with the Colts when Peyton was there, so you know he didn't do much work. Chase Daniel, 3-year contract this year, $13 million, half of it guaranteed. Tip the hat to my friend Jeff Nally with Select Sports down in Texas, a good agent to get that deal, because if I'm a general manager signing Chase Daniel, I'm going to offer a minimum contract to him. Chase Daniel's been in the league 12 years. He's done for 1,500 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 6 picks in 12 years. That's his entire resume. This is why Mrs. Firestone with the Detroit Lions is discharging everyone from the front office and the coaching staff. And, you know, if Chase Daniel is your starting quarterback and you are attempting to start your Detroit Lions, you should look in the mirror and discharge yourself. You should have someone else manage your team. Because, see, you got to be very, very careful. It's a game-time decision, not for one player like we were with Keenan Allen. It's a game-time decision for the whole roster. And running back, even Hawkinson, I don't think, and, you know, I'm the guy that believes in next man up football, but with what we need in Week 15, Chase Daniel won't deliver for your Detroit Lions that you need. A hobbled but competitive Matthew Stafford will. So that's my take on that.
No, and Farrell, I think those are all good points, and certainly I think that, you know, when it comes down to it, if you're thinking about starting Marvin Jones or Hawkinson for $500,000 here with 2 weeks to go, you may want to look elsewhere anyway. Just real quick, and we got Mike Jenckes coming up here, the Football Guys Players Championship leader, in just 1 minute. Before we get to him, Farrell, Frank Ragnow, you probably already saw this, the starting center for Detroit, has a fractured throat. Yes, that's right. The Packers broke his throat, and he still played the last 3 quarters of the game. Good on you, Frank Ragnow. But he is maybe not going to be playing the game against the Titans this week. And I think it comes back to DeAndre Swift, who probably will be playing in this game. How do you feel about DeAndre Swift, knowing that it could be Chase Daniel knowing that it could be a battered Matthew Stafford, and knowing that the Lions will not have the center of their offensive line going this week. Are you still feeling okay about Swift, or is he a bench guy?
No, he's been bench guy for me because I've had to keep him as a bench guy because of his injury situation. He flashes, but I don't think they're going to be in a situation in this game where he can develop any continuity, any consistency carrying the ball. So he may catch some things. He may flash a long run. Tennessee's defense improves when they begin to make plays. They're a team that plays a lot off of rhythm and vibe and momentum. They'll make some plays against Detroit. If it's Daniel, they'll make a lot of plays. If it's Stafford, they'll make some plays. Swift is not my guy, unless he's the only guy you have.
Yeah, he's sort of like a desperation type guy. I mean, I understand you want to increase the variance. You want to go for the super upside. How much upside is there for Swift with, again, less than optimal quarterback situation, definitely less than optimal offensive line situation, probably not much there. Let's talk to our guest tonight. I want to bring him in right now. He has been playing high-stakes fantasy football, started 6 years ago, actually, but he's actually been cashing in leagues and DFS for almost 20 years. Already has more than 4 dozen high-stakes leagues titles to his name. He's looking for one of the biggest scores ever in his career this year, as he is in the driver's seat for the $500,000 grand prize with 2 weeks to go in the 2020 Football Guys Players Championship. You follow him on Twitter at Jenckes Mike. And now we welcome him onto the show. Season's greetings to you, Mike Jenckes. Thanks for popping on with us tonight, man.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I know we are. Yes, well, not Jinx, Farrell. We're talking because this is the worst thing I can hear on this show tonight. Is somebody coming on, willing to come on and fight the HSFFO or Jinx, as it were, to try to still win a $500,000 grand prize. So, Mike, I know there's a lot. You listen. You've been to this rodeo before, trying to win these big prizes. 2 weeks to go in this. There's a lot of football left, but seeing your name at the top of the leaderboard, heading into week 15. It's got to be exciting to see that, right? What's that been like?
Yeah, honestly, it's you kind of just have to just play it down a little bit, because obviously there's so much football yet to be played, and especially Farrell was hurting my soul a little bit earlier, especially being a Bears fan, hearing Chase Daniel's stats, because again that was seeing football last year was pretty brutal, and even some of this year. So. But again, like I said, there's a lot of football to be played. I'm just happy to be where I'm at with the team that I have, and I'm just pretty excited to see kind of how it all plays out.
Well, we're excited to talk to you about how you think it's all going to play out tonight, for sure, Mike. This is exciting to have you on. I promise you, the entire duration of our interview tonight is going to be all about fantasy football. After we get this one question out of the way, when you are not dominating all these high-stakes leagues and DFS and what have you, can you tell the listeners what you're doing for a living?
Yeah, sure. I have actually been a physical therapist for about 13 years now with Athletico Physical Therapy. So I am a facility manager and a physical therapist by trade. So it's nice to actually hear about players' injuries and hear kind of what they're going through, because usually I can have a little bit of a one-up on, how long that might take them to get back and where they're kind of at actually through the rehab process. So.
See, that's interesting to me because – yeah, totally, Farrell. And that's what I was going to ask you next, too. Before we get into fantasy football, you probably, you see these injuries happen. What the medical teams are reporting. What the teams are reporting. And, when they're saying, it's going to be a long process. We're talking 6 to 8 weeks. You might think, I saw this. I know this type of injury. It's more like a 2 to 3 week thing. Or on the flip side, when they're talking about he's day to day, he's going to be back soon. Maybe a Kenny Golladay type situation where you kind of knew no, this is not a 3 week situation. This guy's going to be out long. Has that happened to you over your high stakes fantasy football career where you've used that to your advantage?
Yeah. I mean, obviously these players are super different than you or I. I mean, again, you got people like Adrian Peterson that can come back on an ACL, after 4 months and still dominate the league. Whereas again, you would think a midfoot sprain that people can kind of get over can actually cost a player a season, and I think that especially for receivers that tend to like push off on a midfoot sprain or even running backs. I mean, some of those I kind of get wary of, and I say, you know what, I'm going to kind of stay away from this player, or even someone like Joe Burrow, who again had a catastrophic knee injury, and they're talking about more than a year as far as his rehab goes. You kind of look at that as far as dynasty, and even next year, and seeing kind of where you're at with that player, because again, it changes your thoughts on where you draft them, and if you have a great quarterback to begin with, and you might want to draft Burrow later on, I mean, that would be, ideal, but definitely don't make him your first round or your first QB kind of off the board.
Farrell, I know you want to talk to Mike about the Chiefs here real quick. Before you do that, real quick, now that I know we have a physical therapist, a guru in our midst, the Saquon Barkley injury that we saw earlier in the year, is that going to dissuade you from drafting him in the first round, or maybe the first half of the first round in 2021, Mike? What do you think about that Barkley knee injury?
Yeah, and it's kind of same thing. I mean, like he coming out of college, I mean, he was, that prototypical running back. I mean, he was probably closer to Adrian Peterson than really anybody that you can think of in past history. And, there were a couple times, again, watching him play, again, like he would cut and it would just look awkward to me. So again, like I've always thought that his running style had just a little bit too, I don't even want to say too aggressive, because again, like you look at Derrick Henry and you think to yourself, like there isn't a too aggressive when it comes to, what we're seeing right now with him. But like, there was just something about him that I just didn't really want to touch. And I barely had any Saquon this year, to be honest with you. If I came up with the second overall pick, I was going kind of more, I mean, it all depended kind of which leagues I'm in, and if it was like a full point PPR. But I mean, Kamara just sounded much more interesting to me at that spot versus like Barkley, who didn't really have the best offense to kind of go off of and to kind of go through. So I'm probably going to go through the same thing next year, and just if he's rising up draft boards and he's like still second or third overall, I mean, I really have to look at the other players at that time and see kind of what the training reports look like. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of year after ACL players. I just am not.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. And, watching players move is what it's all about. I had an old scout that lined me up when I was a very, very young sports agent. And he says, stay away from the ball. Look at what everyone's moving. Look how quickly they move. But when they do move fast, see how much ground they cover without a lot of effort. And I've noticed that about Barkley, too. I certainly couldn't so eloquently describe what I did notice, but it looked like a little hitch, for lack of a better word for me. You guys that are doing very, very well this year, there's something that I've noticed that is almost regular practice amongst all of you. And I want to know if it's very, very common for you to do throughout your drafts. But you've had success with stacking players, and there was no more successful stack this year than Travis Kelce and Hill. Was that something that you planned? I've done it before, but generally it ends up being by accident. Is that something that you planned for in attacking a draft?
Yeah, honestly, it wasn't. I mean, again, when you look at, when I go into a draft, I mean, the biggest thing that I want to do is kind of find value, wherever that value kind of occurs. And again, in this particular draft, again, I got Kelce in the first round. I mean, again, because of such a high value this type of format puts on tight ends. And then, coming back in that second round, I mean, Tyreek was still there. So I'm like, okay, it was between Tyreek and Godwin. And I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, again, when you have another receiver in that midst, again, like I would wholeheartedly take Tyreek, any day of the week. So again, and to be honest with you, again, like I kind of experiment. I mean, I do a couple different ones. Obviously, some days I'll go running back heavy, and then other times I'll really hit up the kind of not necessarily zero running backs. I don't think you can do that nowadays, but at least receiver and tight end heavy in the beginning of the draft and kind of see which one plays out better. For me, at least this year, I mean, it's been a little bit more of the kind of not the zero running back, but again, like the receiver and tight end heavy tended to work out a whole ton better for me this year. But not to say that's going to be the same case every year, but I think this year in particular, it was pretty fortuitous to do it that way.
Hey, this is interesting, Mike, that you talk about the zero running back. And so you are not a believer in this. You don't think zero running back is ever a way to go. Talk a little bit about why this is a strategy that you will not apply in your high-stakes drafts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, when you leave points on the table, it's going to be hard. So, I mean, again, when you're not getting a running back, at least in the first 4 rounds, I mean, that changes kind of your whole philosophy of drafting. Again, I think if you draft a little bit earlier on, so, I mean, again, depending on when sites open, I would say it's a little easier to draft a zero running back philosophy because, again, you can have some really late players that can kind of bloom for you versus, again, when you start getting closer to the season, again, everybody reads the same reports and everybody's kind of on to the same players. So, again, the people like, Jonathan Taylor and, all those other people just rise up the draft board so that, in general, the zero running back philosophy just, it's a lot harder. So I would say, again, if you're drafting early, I mean, it's a little bit easier to do that way. But again, it's really hard now to, especially in a league like this where, again, you're trying to get at least 20 points from every player. It's hard. You can't do that with, I would throw up some bad running back names, but I don't want to, I don't want to say anything bad about people. But again, you don't necessarily have.
I'll send you my roster and you can read it, Mike.
So this is good. Now we got some zero RB insight here from Mike Jenckes, the leader in the Football Guys Players Championship. One of the other things that I have always done historically, this is even before it was a thing, before I really knew waiting on quarterbacks was a strategy for high stakes. I've been doing this since the mid-'90s, but I love to wait on quarterbacks when you only have to when you only have to start one. You did it in this draft where you're first place overall. You got Josh Allen in the 10th round and Aaron freaking Rodgers, who might be the leading contender for MVP in the 12th round this year. Josh Allen in the 10th, Aaron Rodgers in the 12th. Insane. So you saw how this team turned out. How likely is it that you'll go early quarterback in your drafts next year? Non-existent? You'll try it in a few? Or how are you sort of playing this, Mike, when you look to 2021, given how this draft played out?
Yeah, I mean, looking at my previous drafts, I mean, even talking about last year, again, I honestly thought some of the value was getting someone like Patrick Mahomes in the 3rd or 4th round. And again, that just didn't work out. I mean, he obviously got injured. Who knows without an injury, what that year would have looked like for him. But, I mean, again, it just didn't work out. I mean, again, just my teams just didn't look as good and as solid as if you kind of wait a little bit on quarterback. But again, when you wait on quarterback, it's got to be the right quarterback. You can't wait and get Daniel Jones, because again, that's right. What just kills your team. And I think, being a Chicago fan, man, seeing Aaron Rodgers every single time count this man out, he'll come back at you 100 times over and spite you and make sure that you have had the worst day ever. And I think that, when his team drafted a quarterback in the 1st round and he broke up with his girlfriend before the year, I was like, sign me up, Aaron Rodgers, every team I can get him in. I had a feeling, man, this man was going to go nuts. And, I'm happy I did. Again, a lot of my teams that just won regular season, leagues had Aaron Rodgers as my top quarterback. And again, he's been phenomenal this year. So I definitely think that, sometimes real life has a little bit to do with fantasy football. And I definitely think that this is one of those times where, some of those off-season reports and news stories, I was like, okay, this man's going to be on a mission this year. I don't really care what anybody else says as far as them running the ball or just where he was at this last season. I just was all in.
See, you read between the lines, and that's what makes a champion. Some people, because I think, because Rodgers, the nonsense about him not being able to work with the coaching staff and there being a rift between them, and people played that up too much. That was a non-story and a non-thing. You draft, you're a true veteran of high-stakes fantasy football. Your name is famous. You are the proverbial butter and toast from coast to coast. Everybody knows who you are. So, for those of us that have not had that level of success, you've given us a good platform to go with. But how would you wrap it up and sum it up? It's the best thing to do to win. You're saying you need 20 points from each player. That's one way. You're saying you need to know how to manage these rosters. Just kind of wrap it up for us and say, winners, guys still trying to win, guys that are already thinking about next year. What would you tell them to do?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about just drafting, I would definitely say, tier your players. Make sure, again, you don't necessarily, try not to put numbers on your players, but like tier them. Get different tiers of here's the first group of receivers taken. Here's the first group of running backs taken, and if those are taken, who are you taking after that? I think that when you tier them, it kind of gives you a little bit better of an idea of what you want to do kind of with your draft when it comes to you. Again, like numbers are sometimes arbitrary, and I think that when you tier them, you can kind of give yourself an idea of, where you want to go. Obviously the weight on QB again, but finding the right QB, I think that's huge. All my winning teams had somewhat of a decent quarterback all year long. Whether that be, a Josh Allen or an Aaron Rodgers, having that ability to fall back on a really good quarterback and gain the points when maybe some of your other team doesn't. And I would say, know your systems, and again, it's so funny when people don't necessarily look at offensive lines, but I mean, it's really important when it comes to some of the running backs, early on, like, is it a plug and play philosophy? When you have someone go down like Christian McCaffrey, will it be a plug and play situation with a Mike Davis, or, is it going to be a Fournette situation? What is it? What is it going to be? And I think that for me, you just kind of have to look at the new systems that are being in place, early on. Put your research in. I mean, I think it's sometimes hard, but I mean, again, when there's so much information out there, it's figuring out which sites really work for you and which things really speak to you as far as, who's giving you the best advice.
You're listening to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour with Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott, talking to the 2020 Football Guys Players Championship leader, Mike Jenckes, here as we head into Week 15 of the championship round. I'm looking at this, which, by the way, we should probably bring up a chat from probably our number one fan in the chat room right now, Kern Reeve, who plays not only in the FFPC but in the KFFSC as well. And he actually wanted to know, if I can find it here as I'm scrolling back. Maybe I scrolled back too far for his question. But here it is. So Michael Thomas, we all know he's not going to play this week, but we do know Drew Brees is playing this week. What about Emmanuel Sanders as a flex option in Football Guys leagues, FFPC main event leagues? Mike, I pose this question to you. Does Sanders register for you this week, or are you kind of looking elsewhere at the receiver or the flex position, given what Sanders has done over the course of the season?
Yeah, and again, this all depends on kind of leagues, if it's a PPR, or are we talking just daily fantasy? From my standpoint, again, I know Drew Brees is going to really, look to Kamara a little bit more versus, an Emmanuel Sanders type. So again, I'm probably bumping up, once I hear Drew Brees is playing, again, I'm bumping up Kamara in my rankings versus and Emmanuel Sanders, because again, I think he has more of an affinity to the tight end as well as the running back. So again, if you have a different option, I would go with that. Something, again, if you're talking about daily, more like, a Brandon Ayuk situation, because again, how many targets that man's going to get coming this weekend. But again, I would probably have to know maybe some of the other receivers in his league. But again, I would probably look elsewhere from Emmanuel Sanders.
It's something you have to consider. Every team is different, and we try to help out all the teams, this time of year in the FFPC as much as we can. But when you have to use and I totally agree with Mike here, when you have to use the crutch of it kind of depends upon your team, You know he's not a must-start. You know he's not a top 20 guy, but he could be valuable depending upon your other options. Kind of stuff that we were weighing last night, us Keenan Allen owners, in knowing whether to start him or not. I want to get to this question here for you, Mike. You are up in the Football Guys Players Championship by roughly 20 points. It's right between 19 and 20 points. Knowing that you are leading this competition by that much, has that affected your lineup setting strategy at all? Are you still trying to be aggressive, still trying to increase variance, still trying to widen your league at this point, trying for big leagues at the big weeks at the expense of maybe not having a great scoring week? Or, are you trying to set a safer lineup? Or does none of that come into play when you're this high up in the competition?
Yeah, this team is kind of different. Again, like I don't have such a deep bench. When you talk about Ronald Jones going down with an injury again, like it kind of changes, what your lineup style looks like. And again, I would definitely say that it's not as crazy decisions as far as my week goes. Again, I think the hardest decision for me, at least in this week, is do I do Josh Allen or Aaron Rodgers? And again, it's I feel like that's a decent problem to have. So again, but again, I wouldn't say that there's any kind of harder lineup decisions. But I mean, overall, my advice would be go for safety with upside rather than receivers or running backs with like huge variances. People like Slayton who can score you 20 points or 2 points. I think that those are the players that you kind of have to look to bench right in these type of weeks because again it's not worth it for your team to have a 2-pointer go off as far as your receiver goes.
Well, I got a question for you. You take in the running backs with the virus raising its ugly head in Tampa and Ronald Jones not being available. So now we go and take a look. You mentioned him earlier with Fournette. And, I go back to Fournette when he has had multiple carries. I think he's done very well. I don't have him rostered anywhere, but he looked good to me. I added it up in weeks 2, week 7, and week 8 when he actually gets some work. He's averaging over 5 yards a carry. The rest of the year, very little action. So is this a player that you feel that you might be able to get those 20 points out of that you say you need to keep progressing through the leaderboard and find yourself on top?
Yeah, I think Fournette is so hard to predict. He was a healthy scratch last week, and yes. Most of the coach talk this week is just more so that, they're prepping him to be the starter. And I think like I was talking about earlier, I think, this is definitely not necessarily a system that's a plug and play. It's not a Panthers. So, I definitely expect McCoy and actually, Vaughn maybe to a very lesser extent to get a couple of those carries and almost vulture a little bit of some of the touches off of Fournette. McCoy looked good last week. It's not vintage McCoy, but he looked, a decent enough to where, again, I think he's probably going to warrant a couple touches. So when you have that kind of a game, and again, you're talking about a Falcons team that, even though they're a horrible defense, they still will put up some points. I don't necessarily know if it's a game script where you're going to just run Fournette, 25 to 30 times. Like that might be more of a passing game for Brady, where you kind of look into some of those receivers to have bigger games than you are to Fournette. So, I think it's all about game script and trying to predict that. I think that's sometimes the hardest part of this whole, industry is to try to actually predict what's going to happen in the game. But again, for me, I would again try to go elsewhere if you have a different option. But again, this is injury time. If you have Fournette and you have nothing else, again, he's kind of around some of those, RB3s for me at this point in this week. So again, I might be wrong on that, but again, I definitely think that I would go elsewhere.
Talking to the leader in the Football Guys Players Championship here as we head into Week 15, it is Mike Jenckes talking to both me and Farrell Elliott here in the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. It's interesting, Mike, that we get you on because we're talking about, well, what did you get right? Who did you draft correctly? Who did you start correctly? Who did you blind bid on correctly? But I also want to kind of shift the conversation to not only who did you get right in your evaluation this year, as far as players that are crushing it, that you drafted in a lot of spots, players that have been stinking, that you have nowhere. Who did you get right in your evaluations in the drafting process in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little about him earlier. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is kind of top of my list. I think that, it just, again, seeing kind of the writing on the wall, I just felt like he was going to have a bigger year than people were giving him credit for. I would definitely say Calvin Ridley, I guess, to start at the beginning of the year, maybe not as much, towards the middle or even now, but again, like, I feel like he was setting the league ablaze the first couple weeks. I definitely have him in some of my leagues. As well as, I feel like Allen Robinson, you kind of have that kind of, that floor, which, again, you kind of need from a receiver, again, because the Chicago offense has been so brutal to watch these last couple weeks. I guess less the last couple weeks, more the middle of the season. I think that was hurting my soul. But, again, I think that those are kind of the players that I feel like I definitely got right. I would say my wrong portion of this was more so where I think I listened a little bit too much to the Derrick Henry haters. The people that thought that in PPR settings that this man was not going to repeat what he did last year, and you can just see where he's at. Even though he might not catch a lot of passes, I mean, again, any given week he can go for over 200 yards, and I think that that was one that I kind of I have him in a couple leagues, but I would definitely say I wish I had him more, just based on the production and where he's at. I would say maybe even Darren Waller too. I would have wanted him a little bit more in some of my leagues. I think that obviously seeing what he did on Thursday night, I mean, just he's capable of that. Game in, game out, he's just a beast. And, Carr looks to him very frequently. And, again, I missed that one a little bit because I think that he was probably a value where you kind of got him in most drafts and maybe even the 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds.
Boy, when you have a Waller and a Kelsey and those type of guys, you don't have a lot of tough decisions. And I don't think your quarterback decision is a tough decision. You might between Rodgers and Allen, it's you can overthink it perhaps, but either way, you're going to be all right. So you've been through this season, and now this weekend and next weekend is so very, very important. Do you have a difficult decision? Are you like some of the rest of us? Are you struggling with something?
Man, honestly, no. I think probably in some of my other leagues, I would say figuring out the San Francisco running back situation. And I think that whether or not to bench Wilson or even start him based on kind of some of the reports that we've got so far that looks like we might have a healthy running back come out. I just don't know what to do in that situation.
Listen, I think it's one of those things where it's like when you get to this point of the season, the lineups sort of set themselves, and that's not always true. I mean, sometimes you do have to make tough decisions. We all have to make we all had to make tough Keenan Allen decisions last night. And as much as I say I'm like, I've made my peace with it, I still kind of regret it a little bit, given what could have happened.
If you're first out of 10,800 teams, then it's probably not as
You're
tough.
Doing it right.
It's probably, I guess that was a dumb question by me, but, I wonder sometimes, I look at the roster and I say, well, he had 2 first-round draft picks. No, you can't. He didn't. He didn't have 2 first-round draft picks. That's against the rules. I mean, it's just a wonderful job, and but anyone can make mistakes with a wonderful job. You didn't, and good for you. I hope you keep it up.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to keep praising you, Mike. I do want to get to a couple of emails here before we got to cut you loose here from listeners that wrote in wanting to get your expert opinion on this. This first one's from George in Mount Kisco, New York. He writes, "Hey, Mike, if Antonio Gibson is indeed active this weekend, do you play him or do you fade all Washington running backs in your starting lineups? Keep crushing football guys, dude. That is George in Mount Kisco, New York. Now, Gibson came back. I think he got a limited practice in today, so there is a chance he could play. But, Mike, what's your sort of take on the Washington running back situation if Gibson is up and playing for Washington this week?
Yeah, I mean, not injury related whatsoever, but again, I love Gibson this year. I mean, he just some of his running style, the way he was actually going about it. I mean, again, I was rostering him in a lot of daily fantasy sites and doing, fairly well with him in my lineups. I think the tough part about it is, we kind of have to keep looking at the reports and seeing kind of if he's going to be there. J.D. McKissic has been fairly serviceable as a PPR running back. I mean, he's getting 3 to 4 to 5 receptions per game and turning him into something. So I think that it makes kind of Gibson's job to be more valuable for you a little bit harder. So I mean, I do think again if he is in it's probably hard to find a better replacement right now in your lineup. So I would probably say again, if he is starting, I would have to play him. But I mean, again, it depends. I wish I saw this guy's lineup to see kind of where he would be at. But I would say that would be my thought. If he's playing, I would start him because again, he is another running back that I feel like can go off as far as for your points.
Yeah, he could, and that's something that we will be watching closely as it gets to be Sunday and figure out if Gibson is indeed active. This is a Saturday night question for anybody who's listening to the show live or streaming it tomorrow while you're watching whatever college football conference championship of your choice, Pac-12, whatever, Big Ten. Roger, Bellsville, Maryland. He writes, "What's up, Mike? Assuming Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, and Curtis Samuel are all available on Saturday night, which of the three would you be good with among your Week 15 starters?" That is Roger in Bellsville, Maryland. Thank you for the email, Roger. Are you good with all of them? Are you good with any of them, assuming that they are all active off the COVID list, Mike? How do you sort of play this with these Panthers receivers?
Yeah, I think Robbie's been kind of giving you week in, week out production. He's kind of that been your, saving grace through this whole process. So again, I think you kind of go with what got you here, and that's going to be Robbie Anderson. Obviously with DJ Moore, same kind of thing. I mean, he could go for 7 and 120. But again, I think that when you're looking at it and what got you to this point, I mean, go with Robbie Anderson. But again, when with the other stuff, I think it's with the other two receivers. Again, I don't have a lot of DJ Moore. I mean, just looking at his playing style and kind of how what his stature is. Again, I usually when I draft, I kind of draft for more Robbie Anderson's build and type. So I think that. When you're talking about this week and just overall, I mean, I'm going Robbie Anderson any day of the week.
Farrell, you have one final question, and then I want to get to as many listener emails as we can. And we've taken up enough of Mike's time here on Friday. He's got to get back to scheming his way to keeping this Football Guys Players Championship lead into Week 16. One final question for him, though. Good sir.
Oh, it's my favorite question. It's the reason I do the show, Mike. Your bust. I want to know your bust. You gave us an idea of who hasn't worked for you this year, but I want you to give us your bust this weekend and your sleeper. It's a guy everybody's going to start. You're not going to start him because he'll bust. And the sleeper is somebody that is just out of nowhere and could deliver a team moving up the boards. Moving up the leaderboard in Week 15.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly will start with my bust. I talked about him earlier. I think Fournette's going to be my bust. I don't think this game script is actually going to look like what everybody thinks. Again, I think it's going to be a little bit more of a shootout. I predict more receiver kind of points for Tampa versus more of the running back. So I would say that would probably be my bust. I don't know how much we have sleepers nowadays with some of the news we've kind of got, but And again, thankfully he's on my team, but I will wholeheartedly say for daily fantasy, I mean, start Brandon Ayuk. I really think he's going to have playing against a Dallas defense probably being somewhat shadowed by, Rashard Robinson. I think that, he's had over 49 targets in the last 4 games. I honestly think he's going to be a beast this week. So I'm hoping against hope again because he's in my lineup. I think he's going to be great. But I think that just from a daily standpoint, start Brandon Ayuk.
See, I love that because Ayuk is a real contributor to most teams, and you have him as your sleeper. So that's a good thing. That shows, again, the success that you're having. But, I mean, you killed it tonight, brother. I'm telling you, I don't know if I'm going to let you get away with Ayuk as a sleeper, because if you think he's a sleeper, then you might be sleeping. I'm not, but I tell you what,
I can give you a couple other ones. I mean, I'll probably say
No, I'm satisfied with that one. We'll be all right.
No, I'm not satisfied. I'm not satisfied.
All right, let's hear it. Let's hear the real sleeper. See, he was holding out on us, Balky. Mike was holding out on us, and I got him to come with the real thing now. Go ahead, Mike.
I would say Russell Gage this weekend, too. Again, Julio Jones is not playing. I think Russell Gage is going to go for at least 7 or 8 targets from Matt Ryan. Like I said, it's going to be a little bit more of a shootout. This is probably going to be more of a high-scoring game. I would definitely say that's kind of a nice one to kind of put in your lineup. Set it, forget it. I do think you're going to get a couple, possibly even a touchdown out of him. I think he's going to be really good in your lineups, and he's probably only going to be rostered in about 5% of leagues when you're talking about daily too. So,
I like it.
There's another one. Boggy, hold on. He's got another one. You got
go ahead, Mike.
You said 2.
Oh no, I didn't say 2. I could probably come up with more for you, but again, those are my two ones that I kind of like.
We've
I would
exhausted
say again,
the expert. Good job. I like Russell Gage. Russell Gage is a sleeper. He's between the two. If Russell Gage scores a touchdown this weekend, you win the sleeper contest for the year. So
there you go. Mike, listen. This was so much fun. Farrell and I brought this up last week and the previous couple weeks. A lot of times when we get to early to mid-December, we get a lot of people gun shy about coming on the show because they think they're going to jinx themselves and they're not going to win big money, which, I mean, who knows? There's 2 weeks of football left. There's a lot of football left to be played. We certainly appreciate a man of your ilk coming on this show, a guy who's already won 4+ dozen high-stakes fantasy football league championships, a guy who's had a lot of success in the fantasy football industry. So awesome to hear your insight. Very entertaining stuff from you tonight. We will all follow you on Twitter at Jenckes Mike. And certainly are rooting for you the rest of the way as you try to bring home a $500,000 grand prize in the Football Guys Players Championship. Don't be a stranger. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the rest of Week 15. Good luck the rest of the way. And hopefully we'll talk to you again soon, dude.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. I mean, I love talking about fantasy football and football in general. So you guys have a great holiday, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Season's greetings. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to Mike Jenckes, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at Jenckes Mike. Farrell, good stuff from him tonight as, very forthcoming.
Yeah, and he leaves, he brings it all. And he, although he was holding back on us on that sleeper, we got it out. But, Jenckes, Jenckes. Now, I'm going to invite Mike, along with all the guys that come on the show, to come play in Kentucky. And, we give all those trophies out, and he's likely to win one. And I got to get the spelling down, Jenckes. We're going to make sure that we get that right on the trophy.
I will make sure I get that right. I'm going to send that over to you as well as the last couple of guests because we want to make Kentucky as rich as possible for
wouldn't that be great?
The best in the world. Yes, for sure. And we don't need me winning any more leagues there. Which, by the way,
why don't we? Now hold on. We have just very, very quickly. You are doing very, very well, both in the main event live draft. You did well, and you are you placed teams in the Run to Daylight or spring leagues Run to Daylight and Checkered Flag, which we had in the middle of the COVID shutdown, and they were a blast to draft in. And you're in the run for one or two $5,000 prizes. You're doing great, Balky. Everybody needs to know that that you are making your home in Kentucky well worth it.
I've never played as many Kentucky leagues as I have this year for sure. Already got 2 main event titles, league titles to my name. I'm leading one of the dynasty leagues. I have several dynasty leagues in contention. We'll see what happens there. And yeah, the Parnelli-Jones division in the Checkered Flag, I'm doing really well in too, thanks to Aaron Jones and Alvin Kamara. So I'm, fingers crossed that we make it a banner year in 2020. And we're really rooting for everybody in 2020 here. Whether you're playing in Kentucky and the Football Guys and the FFPC, we're going to try to help out everybody as much as we could. Now, I know we're up against it here, and we should cut it off right now. I want to help as many people as we can. So, Farrell, I'm going to go rapid fire on a bunch of these things and just go, sort of quick and dirty on this. We already talked about Julio Jones being out for Week 15 against Tampa. Should you look for somebody else other than Russell Gage, or does he make an interesting flex this week?
Our experts already told us to play Russell Gage. We're playing Russell Gage.
Play Russell Gage as a flex this week without Julio Jones against Tampa, their pass defense, who has been exposed over the last few weeks. David Johnson is expecting to be fully ready to go, getting lion's share touches this week against Indianapolis. That is according to Sarah Barshop on Twitter. He was in close contact of someone with COVID in Week 14, so he didn't play. But you look at Week 15 against Indianapolis, he catches passes, Farrell. Is this a guy that you got to find a way to flex out in FFPC leagues?
No, sir. The Texans, God bless them, Indy number 5 against the run, number 12 against the running back. 30-second rushing offense for the Texans with Deshaun Watson. 30-second rushing offense. No. And by the way, I must, as we're talking about running backs, I know we're going quickly. Last week, Miles Sanders, I said start our good friend McKissick at running back, and Sanders had the big run. The rest of the game, very typical of what I thought he would do in the game. But sometimes something can just happen to score big points and make it worthwhile. I don't think I'm going to be wrong 2 weeks in a row. Don't start David Johnson.
There you go. Don't start David Johnson. I can get on board with that for sure. An interesting question that came up in emails this week. David, North Canton, Ohio, has a similar question that we had last week. He says, I know we'll find out more about Mostert later this week, but if he's out, do I start Jeff Wilson over Ezekiel Elliott? Thanks, guys. Thank you for the email, David, North Canton, Ohio. We know Mostert is going to be a full go, according to Kyle Shanahan. So in this case, you have to play Elliott over Wilson, right, Farrell?
Yes, you play Elliott over Wilson. If you had asked the question, do you play Zeke over Mostert, I'm going with Mostert. Sounds like must start. I go with Mostert. Zeke, no rushing TDs since Week 5. We're nursing a calf issue. What would have been really, really good for players if they had set Zeke down and said, Zeke, you're over with for this year. They would play Pollard. A lot of guys have Pollard. They could see what they had in Pollard as a fantasy player. That hasn't happened. Zeke looks like upper single digits again to me.
I think I'm with you here. Sigmund Bloom was talking about on one of the Football Guys podcasts this week. He's like, it only takes one play for Raheem Mostert to go 80 yards against that Dallas Cowboys defense. And I call it the Dallas Cowboys defense because there is no D in Dallas this year. So it makes sense that you would play Mostert over Elliott. I think I'm with you on that. Dennis in Pleasantville, New Jersey. I saw the movie Pleasantville. I didn't realize it was a real place, but according to Dennis, he lives there in New Jersey. Tyler Boyd carried me through a lot of weeks this season, but the Joe Burrow injury really has hurt him. Would either of you guys play Tim Patrick over Boyd this week? Farrell, we talked about Tim Patrick earlier in the show. Are you strong enough to play Tim Patrick over Tyler Boyd in Week 15?
If you really believe he can keep up that touchdown productivity, it may be so. But Tyler Boyd is the stud of the Cincinnati offense. And He's got 78 catches so far. He got them with another quarterback. Brandon Allen is the guy. Brandon Allen is one of those serviceable backups. And I know one thing. Brandon Allen's going to survive this Pittsburgh defense. This guy be playing with a chip on his shoulder. He's going to look to his number one option often. Tyler Boyd will have a game in a chaser game against Pittsburgh. They get it right. I think they're a 13-point favorite. They may not cover that point spread, but if they don't, it's because Tyler Boyd's scoring touchdowns. I think I'm a Tyler Boyd guy here. There's a lot of young receivers that Drew Lock can throw to. He does like Tim Patrick around that goal line, though.
Yeah, and he does, but he threw the two bit. Well, I guess those weren't around the goal line, but he threw the two big touchdowns to KJ Hamler last week. To your point, Tyler Boyd is a 13-point underdog this week. You got to believe that whether it's Brandon Allen, whether it's Ryan Finley, they're going to be pumping the ball to Tyler Boyd this week as well. I think I am leaning towards Boyd over Patrick this week as well. This next email, Bill in Chantilly, Virginia. Dear Graham and Ditka, has Cole Kmet's uptick in targets given you enough of a nudge to start him over Jared Cook this week with or without Breeze? Merry Christmas, guys. That is Bill in Chantilly, Virginia. Merry Christmas to you, Bill. Thank you for listening. Thank you for emailing. We know Breeze will be in the game this week against Kansas City. Farrell, is that enough for you to start Cole Kmet over Jared Cook?
No. Cook is the one player that has benefited and played well and found the end zone with both quarterbacks. He's not with a sit-it-and-forget-it tight end. But, in the last two games, 3 catches in each game and a touchdown. The Chiefs struggle against the tight end. Tight ends have hit them for 6 touchdowns this year, and they defend the wide receiver very, very well. So consequently, you're losing Thomas here. You got plenty of question marks on the Saints team. The tight end is going to be open on, and he's going. I look for like 5 and 80 and 1 TD from Cook, and that will reward all the people that believed in him. Now, Kmet's a hell of a player. You might consider the dual flex this weekend. He's 7 targets in each of his last 2 games. This guy is 6'6" bulk. He looks taller. At the combine, 37-inch vertical. I mean, even Trubisky can't overthrow this guy. This is the one. This is the one bear that's got to make Mike Jenckes smile. The needle and the damage done takes me back to Neil Young, 1972. I was just a pup. Maybe that's what gets Jimmy Graham back on the field with this hip injury. This is the elimination game. Whoever loses this game between Chicago and Minnesota can truly forget about talking about the playoffs, which is really all either one of them was doing. So there's my long answer. Maybe Kmet deserves a different look, but certainly not over Cook.
Yeah, I love the Neil Young reference too. That's good stuff for sure. I'm with you on this as well. I think there's a lot going in Jared Cook's favor later in the week. The fact that there is Drew Brees, the fact that there is no Michael Thomas. And I like Cole Kmet's long-term upside as well. I mean, it only took Ryan Pace signing, 150 tight ends to find out that, Cole Kmet's the guy. We're going to go with him going forward once they get rid of Jimmy Graham this year and everybody else there. So I'm with you right now, but yeah, I think Cole Kmet has a bunch of long-term upside. I'm playing Jared Cook over him this week.
He would have been drafted much, much higher if Claypool hadn't stolen his glory. See, I got Claypool in on the show. I just wanted to say.
Your favorite Pittsburgh receiver too. Hey, did we reference this on the show? So is Juju Smith-Schuster not a Steeler in 2021 for you?
There's some things going to happen there, and it depends on how it ends. And I think it's too soon. To tell. But you don't know what Juju Smith-Schuster's side is willing to do to stay a Pittsburgh Steeler, and that's something that you'll have to look at. So it's a question. I don't believe we're dealing with a Diggs situation where Diggs says, "I want to be the number one guy, and I want to go somewhere I can prove that I can be." I don't think we're looking at the same kind of situation. So let's table that one to see how far Pittsburgh how far Pittsburgh goes in the playoffs. But, oh, geez, we didn't talk about that offense. They better get it right against Cincinnati, and they better start throwing the ball to my guy Claypool. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I got Claypool going in a lot of leagues this week, so I need him to excel for sure. Final email for you tonight. This also involves a Steeler here. It's from Jim in Centennial, Colorado. What's up, Bulky and Farrell? Thanks to you guys, I got to my semifinal this week. Hey, congratulations. But yeah. I feel I might make the wrong call at quarterback. Oh, this is not good. Who should I go with between Jalen Hurts and Ben Roethlisberger? That is Jim in Centennial, Colorado. Oh, ending it on a tough one here tonight, Farrell. So you look at Hurts versus Roethlisberger. Roethlisberger, as we just talked about, he is at Cincinnati. Jalen Hurts at Arizona. Now, the difference between these two quarterbacks, a couple of differences. Obviously, Roethlisberger reads the defense better than Hurts. He's got the experience over than Hurts. Hurts has the athleticism advantage over Roethlisberger. You know that if any one of these guys is going to use their legs to their advantage, it's going to be Jalen Hurts. We saw it last week against New Orleans. So if you could only play one of these guys in Week 15, is it Hurts at Arizona or is it Roethlisberger on the road against Cincinnati?
I'm sure this league either rewards 4 or 6 points for passing touchdowns. If it rewards 6, Roethlisberger is a no-brainer. If it rewards 4, Roethlisberger is still your guy. Arizona's defense could be looking to get right against Hurts now that they've seen what they want to do. This is a very good team that's been playing very, very poorly in Pittsburgh. And Roethlisberger looks worse than Hurts. Hurts looked pretty good last week, running the ball with his feet. He found some receivers. He played like a rookie that's been watching it all year for a team that has nothing to lose. Difficult road trip for Philly. Roethlisberger gets right against a doormat that he's played against since 2004 when he entered the league. Roethlisberger's my guy here. If it doesn't work, as our gentleman that was previously on the show said, you want to go down swinging by playing your studs. That's what Ben Roethlisberger is. Jalen Hurts has got a lot to prove before we can put that label on him.
Totally with you, and I've always been a guy that goes down swinging with the studs, and unfortunately, I've gone down swinging more often times than I'd like to admit, but I'm with you on this one. Roethlisberger over Hurts. It's interesting because, Farrell, I think I told you this before. I co-host a local fantasy football radio, terrestrial radio show here on Thursdays in Northeast Wisconsin, and there's a caller that calls in every single week for advice on who he's should start out in, a quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end. He calls in every week, and we're at, 15 weeks into the season. I feel like I've given him the correct advice like 3 times, and he's gone the other way. So I've actually helped him because it's like, well, whatever Bulky says, I'm going to go the opposite. So last night, he called in yesterday. Yes, exactly. The Balkman fade. And so he called in yesterday, and he's like, Bulky, I don't know which way to go. Should I play Herbert against the Raiders or should I go Goff against the Jets? And I said, well, it's a kind of a coin flip for me, but I'm going to lean towards Goff this week. So then, of course, he tweets me 8 o'clock this morning. He's like, Bulky, Herbert. And I'm like, did you play him? And he's like, you bet your ass I did. So he played Herbert over Goff. He got those points. Good on you. I'm very thrilled for him. So to bring this back sort of to Jim in Centennial, Colorado's question, I am with you on Roethlisberger, but take that with a grain of salt because I have been more off on quarterbacks than I'd like to admit this year. So if you whenever and Farrell, and I think this is what you've always said to Kentucky owners or FFPC owners, like when it gets to be a coin flip like this where it's so close, go with your gut. This is your team. We will try to provide the best analysis and the best recommendation we can, but we're not running your team. You are running your team. You have to live with these results, not us. We'll do our best, but go with God, go with your gut, and go with what you think you can live with.
That's the best advice you'll ever give, Boggy.
I love having the best advice I will ever get and having you on this show each and every week. Farrell, to reveal, and I'm going to tease this after I let you go here tonight, but you will be back Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, because of Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. We're not going to do a show on Thursday or Friday next week. We're going to do a show on Wednesday at 10/9 Central. You will be joining us to try to offer your best possible Week 16 advice that you and I can come up with. And I certainly thank you for it, and I thank you for advice this week. Good luck in Week 15, my friend.
Thank you, buddy. I can use every bit of it as I chase our chase our leader with all his elite players with my running back tandem of McKissick and Mostert. And I'm coming after you, Mr. Jenckes. I'm coming after him. I'm on my way to get you. All right. You follow
Farrell on Twitter at @JFarrellElliott. You check out the KFFSC at KFFSC.com. You want to compete with us next year, definitely do that at KFFSC.com. Farrell, happy holidays. We'll talk to you on Wednesday prior to Christmas, my friend.
See you then, brother.
Farrell Elliott, thank you so much for popping on tonight. Remember, you can follow the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship on Twitter at KFFSC.com. Wow, what a show tonight. We've gone way over. I know it's the high stakes fantasy football hour. It is tonight the high stakes fantasy football hour and a quarter tonight here on the show. I want to thank Mike Jenckes, who's leading the Footballguys Players Championship, and we'll take that lead into Week 15 here on Sunday morning. Well, Saturday night, really, since we get a couple of games on Saturday afternoon and Saturday evening this week. I want to thank Farrell Elliott, the FFPC, Rob Bryce, and, of course, you. Reminder, if you are looking for more advice from high-stakes players, check out rotoviz.com/podcast. The RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown this week. It's me. It's Adam Grossman, who you can follow on Twitter at AdamGrossman4. Longtime high stakes player. Won a lot of Football Guys leagues. Won a lot of FFPC Dynasty leagues. We get into a lot of conversation here this week. RotoViz.com/podcast as well. Reminder, register for the FFPC World Famous Playoff Challenge and the Football Guys Playoff Challenge today at myffpc.com. World Famous Playoff Challenge, $200. You can win $500,000. The Football Guys one, you register for just $35. And you could win $100,000 there in a more than $700,000 prize pool. The FFPC Playoff Challenge pays down to 1800th place. Football Guys down to 700th place. You are not going to get a deeper payout anywhere in the industry. Daily, season long, doesn't matter. FFPC is where to go there. I've been making some appearances on Rotoballer Radio as well as the Fantasy Alarm Sirius XM radio show going forward here as well. You can expect to hear me there going forward for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Always good to catch up with Raphael Reb and, of course, Howard Bender, Jim Bowden from the Fantasy Alarm. Those guys are all good people. Make sure you are following them as well because they will help you win your FFPC leagues there. All right. I want to remind you, as I just told Farrell, Wednesday night, 10/9 Central, we will have a show this coming week. We will not do a show on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. We are going to do a show Wednesday night, that's the 23rd, at 10/9 Central. We'll have a great guest lined up for you. We'll get you set for your championship lineup, your Football Guys, your main event, championship round lineup. That is all at 10/9 Central. Final day to Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah to all of my Jewish listeners, all of our Jewish listeners. Enjoy the rest of week 15.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, presented by MyFFPC.com. It was broadcast live and heard around the world. Balky and Farrell will be back next week with more analysis, interviews, and advice from guests much smarter than they are. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.
As a reminder, the outro music for the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour provided to us by Frederick the Younger, one of the greatest alt-rock bands you will discover in the Midwest part of the country, in the Kentucky part of the country, anywhere in the country. Got a chance to listen to them live. I have all of their music on my iTunes. Great stuff from Frederick the Younger, as well as the Quiet Howlers. who provide our intro music. QuietHowlers.com, FrederickTheYounger.com. That's where to find their music. It is great stuff, and it is always great having you all listen to this show each and every week. We'll be back on Wednesday, 10/9 Central, and very excited to hear from you and another high-stakes champ as they try to win a $500,000 grand prize in the main event, the Football Guys Players Championship. And remember, you can try to win a $500,000 grand prize in the world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge. Enjoy Week 15, everybody. We'll talk to you again on Wednesday.